Hey, I want you to turn in your Bibles, if you would, to two places. I want you to turn to Numbers chapter 14. And this is really our key verse, I think, for the entire study. It's Numbers chapter 14, verse 21. It's a very critical verse. We looked at it last week. We saw that this is God's purpose. I want to read it again. Because having seen what God's goal is, what we want to do at this point is that we want to trace his steps to see how he achieves that goal. And here in Numbers chapter 14 it says, verse 21, "But truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord." And if you remember, what we have addressed and emphasized all through the study is that when God says, "I will," there's nothing that can stop that. That's what God is going to do. That's what God has decided to do. That's a direction. And because the scriptures are, especially the Old Testament, are a historical narrative, we can follow God's steps. We can watch him actually unfold that story before us, and that's what we're going to do. Now, I want to make a kind of a silly observation to you. I'm just going to write up here Numbers. I think I'm just going to leave this up here. Maybe during the duration of this entire study. But I want to say to you that as we get started this morning, that we're going to move very fast through the scriptures. I've been saying that now for a good number of weeks, but I want you to recognize that. This morning, we are going to go through Genesis chapter 1 through 11. So I'm going to cover 11 chapters this morning in Genesis. This is a word that is known as the prologue. I've actually entitled the message this morning, the prologue. And what the word prologue means is that the word pro means, it means before. And the word logu comes from the Greek word logos, which means word. So in essence, it's the word before. And that is very, very important. That, the word prologue is not in the scriptures, but the way that it is defined theologically is that most theologians call it the prologue, because it's the word that comes before the real story. It's like an introduction, if I can say it that way. If you read a book, I always like reading the introductions as to why people actually wrote a book. I don't ever not read the introductions and the credits that they give to people. So these first 11 chapters that we're going to look at is the word that God gives us before, and I'm just going to add it up here, before he gets to Genesis chapter 12. Now, I'm going to tell you up front, and I will mention it again as we go through it today, that Genesis chapter 12, if I can draw it as a timeline here, let's just say this is Genesis, and this over here is Revelation. Maybe I'm not writing big enough. And so we go from Genesis all the way through Revelation. The biggest break in Scripture, the biggest, largest, most important break in Scripture happens at Genesis chapter 12. And there's a reason for that, and we will see it as we go through. I'm going to teach on Genesis chapter 12 next week, but I'm only going to go through Genesis chapter 1 through 11. Now, I want to say, this is kind of a negative thing, I want to say that most everything that we're going to talk about today is just information. In fact, we're on an information journey as we go through this study. I'm going to give you information. I'm going to give you more information. We're going to look at what God is doing. We're going to look at what God did. We're going to look at why God did it. We're going to do, it's just a lot of information. It's a lot of teaching. It's not a lot of preaching. I'm not going to be making, preaching at you. But here's one of the things that I've learned after being a pastor and a college professor, okay? A seminary professor, is that this is what information does to most people. Anybody know what that means?
Sleep.
Come on, somebody tell me.
Sleep.
It puts you to sleep. If you go and you listen to a lecture and it's just a lot of information, there'll be a point in time where you just sort of get a little drowsy. So if I raise my voice, no, I'm just kidding. I know that that's going to happen up front. I've taught enough, I know enough about teaching that I know that that's going to happen. And you're going to get that little glazed kind of look in your eyes. Anita put on her sunglasses. Tracy may put on hers, And you're going to have that glazed look in your eyes as I go through this, and you're going to kind of roll and everything. So I want you just to know that I recognize that, and I'm not going to do anything to try to actually put you to sleep. And so we read here in verse 21, that God says, and when he opens up Numbers 14:21, he says, it's truly as I live. And now that's God's way of saying, I don't want you to make any mistake about what I'm telling you. Now, when you're talking about somebody that's lived from eternity past to eternity future, God doesn't even live in the dimension of time. When God says, as truly as I live, he says two things. He said there are two key words here. He says that the earth, something is going to happen on the earth. And he says that what's going to happen is that all of the earth is going to be filled with his glory. Those two words, earth and glory, have a great deal to do with how we're going to handle the entire study of this sort of progress of redemption. So the question is how is God going to do this? What is his method? Is it going to be a book like Ephesians where he talks about the church? No. Is it going to be a book like Romans that just identifies doctrine and justification and sanctification and glorification and the sovereignty of God and all that? No, it's not going to be anything like that. If I can say it this way, God is going to tell us a story. And the term that we have used all through this is that, up to this point, is that the story is in the historical narrative part of the scriptures. The story parts. Romans is not a story. It's not a story. It's not a history of anything. In Galatians, we read a little bit of narrative about Paul being and going somewhere, going here, going there, and then he came back to Damascus or whatever it was. But most of the New Testament is, the story part of the New Testament occurs in Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts, right? And the rest of it is basically doctrine and teaching. So what we're going to find as we go through here is that we have to look at the story. Now, there are a lot of details throughout the scriptures that God just doesn't tell us what happened. I'll give you some examples of that as we go through here. There are a lot of things that God didn't, I'd be reading something and I said, well, I wonder why God did that. Well, he just doesn't tell us. And the reason he doesn't tell us is because it doesn't have anything to do with this. It might be good information that you would really like to know and understand, and then he'll skip over whole generations, and then he'll spend 13, 14 chapters just talking about one person. And the reason he does that is because it has something to do with the goal. So, if we're going to be smart about this, what we're going to say is that this part right here is the goal. That is ultimately the goal that God has in mind. That one day, maybe sooner than we think, that one day the entire earth is going to be filled with the glory of God. Now, anybody that studies the scriptures, anybody that's a theologian that does this sort of for a living, teaches at seminaries, teaches on theology, whatever it is, they know that Genesis chapter 1 through 11 is an entire section of Scripture. It's an entire section of Scripture. Genesis 1 through 4, for instance, is normally identified as, I'll write it up here, that say Genesis 1 through 4 is often called the fall. Well, I mean, it's just obvious what happened. God created man, created Adam, created a woman. They had 2 children, and before you know it, the whole thing is just completely out of hand. Cain murders Abel, and the sin nature that Adam had because of his own sin, it just gets transferred in the seed of Adam. It gets transferred to everybody, to the entire human race. So, what I want to say is that Genesis chapter 1 through 11 is going to give us really all of the information that we need to know as to why God had to have a plan. God has a plan. God's going to work that plan. We used to have a saying out at Savannah Riverside when I worked there. It says, you got to have a plan, and you got to do what? Somebody tell me. You got to work that plan, right? You develop a plan, then you work the plan. That's probably, you got to have that at your work. If you don't have a plan, if you don't know where you're going, if you won't know how to get there, and you probably wind up at the wrong place. So God knew that he had to have a plan, and Genesis 1 through 11 is going to tell us why he had to have the plan. Right? Now that's what we're going to try to do today. And then next week we're going to go to Genesis chapter 12. We're going to go to this greatest break in all of Scripture, and we're going to see God begin to work his plan. And we will move through the Scriptures very quickly. Now, I was thinking about me covering 11 chapters, and I thought to myself, I said, my entire church will just laugh at me. They said, oh no, 11 chapters in one day. We may not even get to eat supper tonight. I have trouble with 11 words in a chapter sometimes, in a day. But we're gonna go through these 11 chapters, so just bear with me. Now, I want to make a statement to you, and I want you to appreciate what I'm going to say. Because we're going to get to several places in Genesis chapter 1 through 11 that you're going to just sit there and kind of shake your head and go, why in the world is that there? And all I want to say to you, and I will keep repeating it, teach, repeat, repeat, repeat. You're going to get there, and all I want you to do is just to let it stand. And then I think that I'm going to draw you a diagram as to why it's there. This information that you don't care anything about, that you never read it, any of that, I just want you to say, I want to say to you, just let it stand. Whether it means anything to you, whether you see any value in it, just let it stand. It's what God decided to do. It's how He decided to present His information to us. So what you will find, this is what you will find, is that the Bible is the most selective, I think that's the right word, it's the most selective book in the world. There's never been a book written that is more selective about the information that it's going to give you than the Scriptures. Now, I'm a lot of information there. Don't get the glazed look on me. Just kind of getting started, right? So, and Anita's going to feel bad about putting her.
I have to see.
I know, I'm just kidding you. So we'll get to a certain place here this morning, several places, and you're going to go, well, why in the world did he put that there? Let's just say let's say for instance that you were reading a novel, just a story that somebody had written, okay? Maybe it was a good novel. Let's say it was a good Christian novel about something. And you go to chapters 1, 2, and 3, and everything is going great. And then chapter 4 is just it's a bunch of numbers, phone numbers out of a phone book. You're going to go, what is that? Well, that's what's going to happen. It's sort of similar. Then you read another, that's chapter 4, and then you go to the next chapter, 3 or 4 chapters, and then there's how to solve a calculus problem. And you're going, this doesn't really fit in the story. And I'm saying, just let it sit. Just let it say what it says. In God's economy, that's what He wants us to do. So the Bible may spend several chapters dealing with just one detail about a person's life. I mean, just one detail about a person's life, and then skip over entire generations. I mean, generation after generation after generation, and there's no information that He gives you about all that stuff. But He just, I don't know how many chapters He spends on Abraham. I think it's like 14 chapters on Abraham alone. Abraham had one child from Sarah, and we see him going up into the mountain in chapter 22 or whatever it was, and offering Isaac, and then we'll just skip generations. I mean, hundreds of years, maybe 1,000 sometimes, nothing, no information. That's the Bible. You may ask questions, well, where did Cain get his wife? Well, I think it had to be his sister. Now, that makes sense to anybody. That's just my opinion, but God doesn't tell us where he got his wife, so my answer's wrong. I'm just making an assumption, right? I don't know where he got his wife. Do you know where he got his wife? No. Nobody knows where he got his wife. Why don't you know where he got his wife from? Huh? it's not important to the goal, but it's because he doesn't tell you where he got his wife. So everything that I give you, everything that you give me is just a what? It's a big guess. Right? Everybody see that? So I don't want to worry about the things that God doesn't tell me about because he didn't think they were important enough. If he thought they were important enough for me, that it was something that I needed to know, what would he have done? He would have told us the answer. If he thought there was something going on in this period of time, then he would have communicated that to us and we would have been able to move on. But as we go through this, I think what you're going to see very clearly is that God is always moving toward this specific goal. He's going to fill the earth with his glory. So every time that we get to these events, we're going to have to ask ourselves, is this event moving us in the direction of that goal? Is God actually doing something to make this happen or not? I said that's an important question that we have to constantly be asking. If that's what God says he's going to do, does this fit that? Well, maybe not. And so then we're going to see what God does when that takes place. So the Bible is very selective, and I think as far as God is concerned, it's really not important to him that we know all the details and have all of the information. So what we want to do, and I'll write it right before here, right below selective, is that we want to always be looking at the emphasis of the Scriptures. What is God emphasizing? What kind of information is he giving to us? What is it that he's really trying to communicate to us? What is it that he is emphasizing? Because that's what he wants us to understand. And it's critical for us to look at the emphasis because that's where God's headed. That's what God is actually doing. So as we look at Genesis chapter 1 through 11, in fact, I want you to, you don't have to worry about your place there in Numbers 14:21, but we'll come back to it. I want you to turn to Genesis chapter 1. And so as we look at Genesis chapter 1 through 11, here's what I want to do. I want to emphasize something. What we want to do is that there are two things here. The first is that there is content. All right? There's content. The content is easy to identify. God created the heavens and the earth. God created man. Man sinned. Cain killed his brother. That's content, all right? But the most important thing that we want to look at are the relationships of the information to one another. We want to look at the relationships. That's very important. You might say, well, what's the difference between content and relationships? Well, I'm going to show you. I'm going to try to build that picture for you as we go through here. So we come to this prologue, the word before, and a conservative estimate, okay, is that Genesis 1 through 11, that Genesis 1 through 11, and I don't know the exact number, and it's really not important, but it comprises about 2,000 years. Now just think about how far 2,000 years is. It was when Christ was born, right? To today. It's about 2,000 years. That's a long, long time. And we're going to cover all of that in 11 chapters. It's a long time to cover in just 11 chapters. I mean, wouldn't you want to know what's going on there? But then when we get to, let's say that we get to Genesis chapter 12, verses, through 50. Anybody have any idea how many years that covers? Just take a guess. Huh? Okay, we have 1,000 going once, going twice. No, I'm just kidding.
500.
500 going once, going twice.
400.
400, getting closer. It's 250 years. Now, okay, so we've got 11 chapters that cover 2,000 years, and what's this here? We've got 38 that only cover 250. This is 8 times less, right, than this, but it takes 3 times, more than 3 times as much space to communicate it. Why? Because God is emphasizing. God is emphasizing what He wants us to know. I'm about to burn up. Is anybody warm? I can take off my coat, which I think I may do.
Yeah, you're even making the baby cry.
So, all right. I think I'm going to just, I've been wearing coats and ties now for years because I feel like I represent God. And I don't want to wear blue jeans. Everybody at this conference wore blue jeans with holes in them and tennis shoes, and I'm not going to do that, but it was good. I think I'm going to change my attire. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
I'm going to look like you. I may not even wear a tie. I'm the only one here with a tie. He's the only guy with the tie. So,
It's the content that matters.
yeah, that's right. So, all right. I want to divide. Can I erase all this?
Yes.
Everybody got it?
Yep.
Okay. I want to... What I'm going to do is that I'm going to divide up Genesis chapter. I'm going to talk about Genesis 1 through 11, and then I'm going to divide it up into 3 sections. So what I want to do is I want to call this, I want to do it like this. I'm going to call it section 1. And then we'll have section 2. And then we'll have section 3. And what I'm going to do is I am eventually going to draw you a diagram of this. But I want to talk about it in terms of sections. All right, so let's just start. We're going to start with Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, let me just sort of put that in different words. In the beginning, God created the universe. How big is the universe? Anybody here have any idea how big the universe is? If you tell me you do, I don't believe you. I don't have a clue how big the universe is. When they talk about light years and being 250 million light years away, it's like, are you kidding? Are you crazy? Have you lost your mind? I cannot relate to that. But what he says here is that in the beginning, God created the heavens, and everything that was in the heavens here, it refers to the universe. And then he talks about this one little tiny speck that's almost absolutely inconsequential to the rest of the universe. That's just one little tiny speck. He talks about the earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then he spends the rest of the chapter from verse 2. Look at verse 2. The earth. You would have thought that, hey man, I've created I've created this, millions of light years away stuff and galaxies and all of that stuff, and I'm going to talk about all of that. And he says, the earth. The earth. The earth. The earth. Why is that important? It's because of the goal, right? I'm going to do what? I'm going to fill all of the universe? Is that what he says? No. He says, I'm going to fill all of the, what? Say it with me. Earth with my what? Glory. Is there glory out here in the universe? Absolutely. Just the fact that it's there is glorious to me, that God could create all of these different solar systems and suns and planets and moons and Saturn and blah blah blah. All of that. It's just kind of neat, but it doesn't move anybody. It doesn't change anybody. So God wants to zero in on His glory on this little inconsequential little speck that we call the earth. And so that's what He deals with. And so if that's the case, then that's what? What was the word I used? That's His emphasis. Everybody get that? Everybody see that, huh? Here comes the glazed look. Okay, this is the information here. And so it's because of the goal. It's because of where God is going. It has to be on the what? Earth. Hello. Everybody get that? It has to be on the earth. That's where God's going. All right, we get to Genesis 2. So let me just sort of write it up here. Let me see if I can do it this way. I'm just going to go chapter 1. God creates, I'm going to say, the universe, and I'm going to emphasize the earth. All right, and at the end, what did He create? Or in the last part of it, He created man. All right, in the first part there, last part of Genesis chapter 1. In Genesis chapter 2, He talks about man and woman. He doesn't talk about the earth too much. He just tells them, I'm going to give you authority. You can subdue the animals. I'm going to let you kind of run this kingdom here. All of that kind of stuff. He says, he actually tells us how He did it. And He took the woman, He took the man, took his rib and made her and all of that kind of stuff. And so he spends all his time about this, because what is it that He needs for this right here? He's going to fill the earth with what? Huh? Oh, right. I answered. That's the right answer. But He's going to fill the earth with people. Right? So now He's going to talk about some people that He's got to fill the earth with. Then we get to chapter 3, and man sins. There's man's disobedience. You know the story. I'm not telling you anything new. God curses the ground. He curses the serpent. He curses the woman. Tells the man, you got to work by the sweat of your brow. You've got all of this stuff that's going on here. There's just so many things. And so God, if I can say it this way, because of man's disobedience, it creates God's discipline. And this is not small. Right? We're suffering still from God's discipline of Adam on that one thing. And then we get to chapter 4, and there we see that Cain murders, I'm not going to say kills, he murders, premeditated, he murders his brother Abel. And the family is destroyed. He gets a curse on him. And then he leaves, and the next thing we know, I'm going to say it this way, the whole mankind is infected. Maybe that's the way to say it, right? Mankind is infected with sin. Everybody see that? That's simple, right? Everybody get that? You know that story. You could get up here and teach it just as easy as I could. So it's not, if I were to ask you this question, do you feel like, I'm going to write these words back up here. Do you feel like this, so far in the story, is headed toward that, toward the earth? I mean, toward the earth being filled with the glory of God. Not at this point, it's not. So, Cain turns away from God and murders his brother, and we're not headed toward the goal. Okay, look at chapter 5. Oh, wow, here it is. This is the book of the genealogy of Adam, and it goes all the way to verse 32, to the sons of Noah that begot Shem and Ham and Japheth. So, all of a sudden, right in the middle of all this, I'm going to put 5 here. We have a genealogy. This is the calculus problem in the novel, right? Do you read these things? Do you read these genealogies? I mean, be honest with me. I've read through the Old Testament so many times, and when I get to a genealogy, I just skip over it. I don't read it. I mean, what's a begat? Anybody know what a begat is? Yeah, huh? You read it? Yeah, well, I've read it, but I'm not going to read it over and over, you know. It's like reading the telephone book over and over. I'm not. There's something here.
I'm sorry.
No, there's something here. But there's almost, I'm going to say, there's probably almost, I don't know how many years.
I think God put it there for
He did. I got it. I got it. I get it. I want you just to let it stand. I'm being honest here about these genealogies. I'm being honest about them. They're there for a reason. You can read it. You can go home tonight and do your devotions and read the 3 genealogies that we're going to see. They're there for a reason. I get it. But it's different, right? It's really, really different. This is not a narrative. God begat, God begat, God begat, God begat, somebody else begat, somebody else begat. God did a lot, there's a lot of begatting going on, right? And I just want to say, let it stand. You don't have to figure it out. Just let it do what it's supposed to do, whatever that is. So then we get to section 2. Now section 2 is about Genesis. It's 5. Whoops, daisy. Excuse me. Trying to use same color. It's we got 5, 6, 7, and 8. I think that's right. Is it 8? Does it go all the way through 8? Nope, it goes to 9 and 10. I'm going to erase this.
Don't you think that the genealogies are just like a nice intermission?
I'll get there. I will get there. Three. Nope, I was wrong. I got 5 up here. I'm just really not doing well. So we get to chapter 6, and chapter 6 is about the sons of God that came down, the angels that came down. They procreated with the women. They corrupted the race. They made an irredeemable race, if you want to interpret it that way. All of that. So the whole earth is now corrupt. The whole earth is corrupt. Now, let's ask our question again. What's the question? Somebody tell me the question. Are we what? Are we moving what? Toward the goal? Yes or no?
No.
The whole earth is absolutely corrupt. It's corrupt with violence. It's corrupt with sin. Sin has spread to the entire race. This is on a massive scale. This is on an absolutely massive scale. The entire world, sort of like today, right? Kind of. Everybody say, yeah, it's kind of like today. And except for Noah and his family, every single person on the planet is consumed with evil and wickedness. If you leave it there, where does it say it in chapter 6, verse 5? And the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that there's that word again, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The Lord was sorry that he had even made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. He says, I'm going to destroy man. I mean, the whole earth is corrupt. And Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Are we headed in the right direction? Yes or no? No. We're not. We're headed in the wrong direction. We're going in completely the opposite direction. And so in verse 7, God says he's going to destroy the whole earth and nearly everybody in it. Now, you got to think of it this way. I just want you to think of it this way, that we're only 6 chapters into the Bible. Hello? We're only 6 chapters into the Bible, and after nearly 2,000 years, or however long it is, the entire earth is wicked and evil and corrupt. I thought God was going to fill the earth with people, and he was going to be glorified, and now he's going to destroy the earth. If I can say it this way, it almost looks like we're going backwards. I don't think that's the case, but I think it looks like that. Evil is so bad that God says, I'm going to start over. I gave this first group a chance. That didn't work. I'm going to have to start over. I'm going to start over with Noah. He's sort of like the new Adam in the story, right? He's got a wife and he's got some children and all kinds of things go on with all of that. This is dark. This is bad. That God is even thinking about starting over, but it's very, very dark. Genesis 7. Genesis 7 is the ark, and all the animals they get on all the animals get on the ark. You know, Noah builds the ark, and all the animals, he goes out and gets them, and then the flood comes. Everybody listen. So we got the ark, we got the animals, we got the flood. And now, on the earth, after the flood, I'm going to write it in big letters here, nothing remains. 0. Everything that was alive and remained is where? It's on the ark. One little boat. It's gone. It's gone. Obviously, something went wrong up here. Something went wrong on the earth, and there was no glory here for God. Genesis 8. In Genesis 8, the flood recedes. And then I think Noah leaves the ark, right? Noah and his family leave the ark. I think that's what goes on. Well, we're still not making a lot of progress here. And we get to Genesis chapter 9, if you just want to turn over and look at it. It's kind of a new beginning. It says, so God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Let's start over again. He told Adam, be fruitful and multiply. And you got all these animals here, and you got enough food and all of that kind of stuff. And Noah is told, and he says, replenish the earth. And you can rule over it. Replenish the earth. And then we get to chapter 10. Everybody go look at chapter 10. It is another genealogy that goes from Shem, Ham, and Japheth and goes all the way over to I don't know exactly where it ends here, where it ends, but it ends somewhere. So we've got in chapter 10, we've got another genealogy.
It goes, I think, Abraham's father.
Not yet. I think that's in the next chapter, in chapter 11. And his name is Terah, T-E-R-A-H. All right, so we finally get here. We're in we got section 1, and we got section 2, and now we're in section 3, and all we have left is one chapter. So we only have 2 parts to that. I think the first one is, just let me make sure I get it right, is the Tower of Babel. This is part A. And we have the Tower of Babel in the first 9 verses. And then in the second part of it is part 2, or part B. We have the confusion of the languages, right? I'm sorry, we have another genealogy. In part A, we have Tower of Babel, we have the language confusion, where God scatters them all over the earth. So he scatters the people. Now, I want to say, as we kind of look through this, and then I want to say that part B is another genealogy. All right? So, these people, they're in Mesopotamia somewhere, and they decide that they're going to build this big old huge ziggurat, whatever that was, up to the heavens. They wanted to get up here in the clouds and be with the gods. Really kind of a pride issue. And as far as we understand, everybody spoke the same language, right? They all spoke English, right? Wrong. They all spoke the same language. And they're not being obedient to God. In fact, they don't want to do what God actually wants them to do. They have a sense of pride about themselves. And I guess I get here to this, and here we are, some 2,000 years later or whatever it is, and I have to ask the question at this point, has mankind actually learned anything about God yet? And the answer is absolutely not. They don't know anything about God. They don't worship God. You would have thought that after Noah, after the flood, after everything that happened, that they would at least had some idea of God and the story and what happened and why it happened, and there's been some communication. We don't know because God doesn't tell us what went on during that time. That's sort of the information that he left out, and you can use your imagination, be a little creative with it if you want to. But these people that are covering, that are in this place here, they said, no, we're going to stay right here. And we're going to be able to reach the gods up here in the heavenly places, and they start building this stuff, and God looks down. It says in verse 4, chapter 11, and they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves. We're a big deal, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. Where does God want them to go?
Across the whole earth.
The whole earth. And what did they say? No. No, we're not interested in going to the whole earth. We want to stay right here. We got our little thing going. Don't bother us. We're not going to do what God really wants us to do. Now, I want to say at this point, numbers hadn't been written, right? Well, they didn't really know what God's purpose may have been or what God's plan would have been. Now, I don't want to make a big deal of this, but I think this is the issue here. They say, we're not going to go anywhere. We're going to stay right here. And God says, nope, I want you to go somewhere else. So what does God do? He confuses their languages. And off they go. They have to split up because they only talk one language, and they go, and next thing you know, they start expanding. And that is sort of what God wants to happen, but he had to do it. He had to kind of confuse their languages. So he confuses their language, and they are, it says in verse 8, so the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. And it came to be known as Babel, which the word Babel, have you ever seen that advertisement on TV about Babel? Yeah. About the language and being able to learn the language in Babel and all that kind of stuff. Do you know what the word Babel actually means? It means gibberish. It means confusion. Gibberish would be a good word in our vernacular. It means confusion. So God confused the languages and sent them off. And then we get to part B, and we have another genealogy. And I just want to say, let it stand. You can read it. It's fine with me. And it goes there from Shem, and it goes all the way to verse 32 about Terah. Anybody know who Terah was? Terah was Abraham's father. All right, we're getting ready for chapter 12. We're getting ready for chapter 12, but we are not there. So, we have 11 chapters. Can I erase this? Everybody got this? Can I erase this? All right. So we've got 11 chapters. We have kind of broken them up into 3 parts. Why did we break them up into 3 parts? Somebody give me the right answer. What broke them up?
Genealogy.
The genealogies. Right? They're just there. They're doing whatever they have to do. So here's what we had. If I can say it this way, if I go it this way. We had 11 chapters, and we kind of reduced that to 3 parts, right? Everybody see that? Now what I want to do is I want to take the 3 and I want to make them 1 part. I want to go from 11 to 3 to 1. And I want to show you how we're going to actually do that. And then we'll be making some progress. Now where do you think, everybody listen carefully, where would you say is the greatest break of information in Genesis 1 through 11? What would you say would you say is the greatest break in terms of content, in terms of form, in terms of information? Where does the greatest break occur? Come on.
Chapter 3.
No, that's a narrative, right? The narrative is just flowing. It's going from 2 to 3 to 4. Huh? No, it's the genealogies. They're completely different, right? Wouldn't you say that wouldn't you say the phone book is different than the novel? Okay, it's completely different form, completely different content. It's really not even a narrative. If I can say it that way, it's really not a story. There's no, I mean, it has kind of a beginning and an ending, I guess, but I mean, it's not going to be a bestseller out there. So the first break begins in chapter 5, and the second break begins in chapter 10, and then the last one is in chapter 11, part B. Now, Genesis 1 through 4 is called by the theologians as the fall. It's the fall because of sin. And I want to say this, I want to say it right up front here, is that sin always creates consequences. Sin always, you cannot sin in a vacuum. You cannot sin in your personal life in a vacuum. We as a church cannot sin in a vacuum. Whatever we do, it affects people, it affects our children, it affects our loved ones, it affects our families, it affects our friends, it affects where we live. We cannot sin in a vacuum because sin always creates different, negative, bad, evil, wicked consequences in people's lives. Nothing, absolutely nothing up to this point in the story, nothing good has happened to man. The only thing that was good is that God saw everything that He made, and He said that it was good. And if you go back and you study that word for good, it means very good. It means incredibly good, amazingly good. And then from there it got worse. It just got a lot worse. So God creates the earth, He creates man, man disobeys, man suffers the consequences, Cain murders his brother Abel, and then there's a genealogy. So the genealogy is the radical break in the narrative, and it's there to let us know that that was one section. And then we go to another one, and that's the next section, and then we go to the third, and that's what we call section 3. So God gives us all of the detail about several people, and then literally with a genealogy, I'm telling you the truth, please hear me out. God just passes over generation after generation after generation after generation. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and doesn't give us any information whatsoever. Why does He not give us the information? Don't tell me, it's easy. We don't need to know. It doesn't have anything to do with this. As far as God is concerned, whatever information He would have given us during that time just did not have any value in filling the earth with His glory. And so we get kind of zero information. He just didn't think it was that important for us to know. Then Genesis 6 begins again. The earth is filled with violence. There's sin, there's wickedness. It's at a massive scale. There's nothing ever like it. God sends a flood. The flood recedes. The waters recede. Noah gets out of the boat. He begins his family again. They start over. And boom. And then you have in chapter 10 another genealogy. So, and then you get to the end of part 3 in chapter 11, and there's another genealogy. Now, to my satisfaction, God has broken these 11 chapters into 3 parts. Now, here's what I want to do. I want to draw this in a simple way, okay? So just bear with me for a minute. It's going to take me a little bit of time to draw it, but I'm going to just do it like this. This is the first part. Okay, each one of these here kind of represent a chapter. So this is Genesis chapter 1, and then this is Genesis chapter 4. And then we have a break. We have a genealogy. And in chapter 5. I'm just going to put 5, okay? Everybody gets that. So we have this break. And then we start over again, and we start over with chapter 6, 7, 8, and chapter 9. So this is chapter 6 here. And this is chapter 9. And then what do we have? Somebody tell me. In chapter 10. Did somebody say it? In chapter 10, we have another genealogy. Right? And then we get over here and we have I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to do 11a. And then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to put another genealogy. And we're going to call this 11b. All right? So, we get here to Genesis chapter 1. We get there. And in this chapter right here, or these chapters, we are talking about man's disobedience. I mean, this was ugly. We get here, and we're talking about God's judgment. Right? Everybody see that? God judges it. He sends a flood here in chapter 6 and 7 and all of that. Man is disobedient. The whole earth is filled with wickedness. And then God gets down here to 11, and mankind is scattered. All right, now, I'm just going to tell you what I think. I think that based on this, that I've taken 11 chapters and I've reduced it to 3 different areas. Everybody see that? Everybody agree with that? Yes, yes or no?
Yes.
Man's disobedience, God's judgment, and then we have thirdly, God scatters everybody throughout the earth. So what we want to do is that now I want to take these 3 different areas and I want to make them into just one. I want it to just be one thing that we are looking at. Can we make it into one? God has created the earth. Man has sinned. He's disobeyed God. He's become wicked. God has sent a flood to judge him. They start all over again, and then they get right back and they don't have anything to do with God. I don't think that this is moving in the right direction. I wouldn't say there's a whole lot of unity here. We certainly are not moving toward the whole earth being filled with the glory of God. In fact, I would say that we were moving away. And I would say to you that if we didn't have the break of Genesis 12, that the story would have gone on just like it had here in this section where the world became wicked again. Very, very wicked. And the next thing you know that God has, maybe it was fire this time, whatever it was going to be. He sent, back up here, what did he do? He sent a rainbow, right? He sent a rainbow, and it had all the colors in it and all that kind of stuff. And the rainbow was a sign that God would never send a worldwide flood to destroy the earth. But if we don't have Genesis chapter 12, I'm just going to write it here. If Genesis chapter 12 does not occur in the scriptures, we're just going to be right back here again, and we're just going to perpetuate the evil and the wickedness and the sin at that point. All right? So, could the emphasis in the first 11 chapters not really be on what God is doing, but on what man is doing? Or maybe I could say it in a different way, what man is not doing. I think that's the emphasis. In reality, God hasn't begun to work. He did something down here in Genesis 1 that was amazing. He did something in Genesis chapter 2 that was amazing, but he hasn't actually begun to work. Man's just kind of rolling along doing whatever it is that he wants to. We could say accurately at this point in the narrative that man has absolutely no regard for the consequences of his life, of his sin, of whatever you want to call it, and he's literally helpless at this point. He's headed in the opposite direction from where God desires for him to go. Now, I submit to you that up to this point, that God has not really begun to work. So, if I can say it this way, I put it in a color up here. I'm just going to do this. What all of this does is that this identifies that man cannot and God must. I'm going to put that in big letters, that God has got God has got to intervene. God has to do something that only God can do. So it's not going to work. It's not going to work at all. And the one unmistakable, undeniable reality that Genesis chapter 1 through 11 makes perfectly clear is that without God, that man is completely without any hope whatsoever. Just left to himself, left to his ideas, left to his imagination, left to his creativity, left to his philosophy, left to whatever you want to leave, man is absolutely hopeless. I want to say to you that without God in my life, I am hopeless. I'm not only hopeless, I'm helpless. I'm convinced that right now, today, that if God removed His Spirit from my life, if the Holy Spirit just vacated me in some way, that I would go back to living in sin before I did, just like I did before I ever got saved. Even with all of the knowledge that God's given me over the last 53 years since I was born again. I don't want you to lose sight of this. If God doesn't intervene, then this whole scenario is just going to keep repeating itself. And if somebody doesn't get saved, if somebody never comes to Christ, if they just play in their little game, they're doing their little thing with their life, and they don't let God intervene in their life, they're just going to keep repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating sin and getting more evil and more wicked. God has to do something because man doesn't have a clue what to do. I would say it even in a stronger way, without God's help, we're just doomed. I know people that are lost and they don't get it. They don't get it. They don't have time for God. They've got time for everything else in their life. And they've got all their ideas. And they want to make all of their money. They want to go to all these places. And they want to do all of this. And they just completely leave God out of their life. And their life is doomed. Just doomed. Without God's help in our life, in our church, in this world, we don't have a prayer. I'm really glad that I know the ending of the story. I'm really glad about that. I don't know about you, but even though I'm saved, I am desperate for God to intervene in my life. I'm desperate for God to intervene in the life of those that I love, in my family, in my children, in my grandchildren, in my great-grandchildren, in my friends, in my enemies. I'm desperate for God to intervene. Man, I look at this right here and I really evaluate it and I realize that the effect of sin is so enormous. It's at such a massive scale. And then I'm just a little microcosm of that, right? If I'm lost, I'm just a microcosm of Genesis 1 through 11. My life is just doomed for failure. Sin infected Adam. He passed it on to his son. He became the father of another race. We're still struggling with it today. We're still struggling with the same thing. It runs all the way from this sin and infecting. We just pass it down to our children. We pass it down to our families. Sin is so wicked. The grace of God is so good, right? It's so stinking good. So what these first 11 chapters really communicate is that God must, maybe I ought to write below that, intervene. Right? Everybody see that? Everybody see that in the story, in the 11 chapters. Hopefully I've made it. I reduced all this. I went from 11 to 3. I went to 1. That man has a need and God has to intervene. He has to intervene on our behalf. So there's got to become this radical. I'm going to say radical. We're talking about a completely radical, different strategy, and it occurs in Genesis chapter 12, which is the most radical break in all of Scripture, because for the first time God says, I will, and then God does. God says, and God does. That's what we've been talking about, right? God said, he says something, but now he's going to do something. And there's nothing that can stop what it is that God is going to do. Nothing. No government, no person, no king, no prophet, no nothing. Probably bad English. But nobody's going to stop God. And we're going to watch that. We're going to watch God just plow right through history and bring about everything that he says. Now I want to reiterate, and then I'm going to close it. God only said about 3 things here. And up to this point, God only said about 3 things. He said, don't eat of that tree. They ate of that tree. God says, I regret I even made man. He had to start over. And he said, build an ark and get into it when I tell you to. That's the only way you'll be saved, is you got to build this ark and you got to get into it. There's only one ark that God has designed for our life, right? Everybody knows who that is. It's a person. It's the person of Christ. That's the only ark that will save you. We have to know that. Just left up to me and my ideas and my philosophy and my worldview, I have no hope whatsoever. So God establishes the fact that He is going to enter. Next week, it's like we're on a play. It's going to be Act 1, Scene 1. The curtain is going to rise, and we're going to watch God begin to do what only God can do. And nobody will prevent that from taking place. All right, any questions, comments?